with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Page.
Welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. My name is Erin, and today's guest is somebody that I'm really excited to talk to. She is somebody who has really kind of run the gamut when it comes to all of those people who are struggling with chronic illness, things like mold, which she's been an amazing expert in, Lyme disease, PANS and PANDAS, which is, of course, one of the things that we focus here on the podcast on. And I'm very excited to welcome her. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Jill Crista.
Thanks for having me. It is an honor.
Yeah. So, first of all, I always say that none of these practitioners come to this, just by happenstance. The vast majority of us come to it because of personal experience. So I'd love to hear what your personal experience was.
Yeah, we come by it honestly, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have twin boys who are now 25-year-old men, grown men, that I unknowingly gave Lyme disease to when I was pregnant. I didn't know I had Lyme. I thought had a rough pregnancy because I had fibromyalgia.
Mm.
And so untreated Lyme, the stressor of pregnancy flared everything. During pregnancy, had a mold exposure, had a mercury exposure. And, these kids have been struggling, pretty much, they're doing great, but have to be very careful with all of their health choices. So I ended up with kids who were born with Lyme. We didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
We just thought there was a lot of neuro, tweak was going on. Like they wouldn't sleep more than 20 minutes at a time for the first 7 years. So it was a rough go. And I'm sure I see you nodding. It's like, yep. And ended up with an official Lyme diagnosis, worked with the amazing Dr. Charles Ray Jones, who then trained me. And then he was saying right out of the bat, I think this is PANS.
Mm.
And sure enough, when we did, the full assessment and the testing, which also taught me a lot about how unreliable the testing was. But if you put them together, the symptoms from one and the symptoms from the other, the lab test from one and lab test together, the other, they were perfect textbook PANDAS PANS.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, it was in the trench learning. And like you said, in those days, that was even a debunked term.
Right.
And, I even talked to a dear friend when I went to a PANDAS conference in DC and went and visited him, and he said, "Oh, PANDAS, I thought that was debunked." And this is after it had already gotten an official clinical criteria diagnosis. So there was a lot. That's when I was like, wow, there's a lot of education to be done here and a lot that we can be doing to support parents and families and these kids who struggle so much. First of all, by unbunking it or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever the opposite of debunking is. And then also to provide in an organized way, the tools that I was having success with, not only with my own kids, because then you get known, in these groups as, hey, we're getting somewhere with this,
Right.
this doctor. So, people flying from all over the world, Guatemala and all over the country, and thought, wow, nothing that I'm doing here is really rocket science. Most of it I was doing out of my own kitchen and medicinary, we did need, pharmaceuticals and that kind of thing and IVIG to kick it off, but a lot could get done with these natural medicines. And our PANDAS PANS doc, who only did the farm side, said that on paper, my kids were much sicker than they were in living color.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "What are you doing? Because I think we need to know about what you're doing." And so we did true integrative medicine. Yeah. So that's my story, how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a few things that you mentioned. The first thing being, I think still, even in mainstream medicine, a lot of the conversation centers around strep, And we forget about all of these other triggers. So things like mycoplasma, Lyme that you mentioned, mold, of course, even things like traumatic brain injury and, significant traumas that occur, physical traumas that occur in these kids can set them into this cycle of PANS. So tell us a little bit about some of the various triggers that you're seeing in your PANDAS patients and how that can translate, because so many of the parents that come to me will say like, oh, well, my pediatrician did a strep swab and they were negative, so they don't have PANDAS. So much of this conversation is about the fact that obviously we need to educate our doctors, but also educating the parents so that they are aware of what to look for and what to ask for in a pediatrician, for example, in what kinds of tests that they might want to run. So tell us a little bit about those triggers.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the strep testing. The triggers I have kind of in two buckets. I have it in infectious and environmental bucket.
Mhm.
So the infectious, it's so much more than strep, but it is definitely about strep. Even if they're a PANS diagnosis that
Mhm.
was not a strep infection that set it off, it was a something else. Strep is uniquely notorious in how it rewires the immune system of our tonsils,
Mhm.
and then it can persist. And if you have fought off one strain of strep, it does not make you immune to any future strains. And it's also the dominant pathogen. So there's more of it. It knows how to rewire our immune system, and you're not immune to the next strain coming down the pike. So strep is a big deal, but it's not the only deal. And that's where I get
Right.
frustrated. Um, and I'll go through the other infectious ones and then go to the environmental bucket. But I just want to say for parents out there, um, the rapid strep test, I think that one of the contributing factors to why this is an increasing diagnosis and there's increasing incidence is our over-reliance on poor testing. So most clinics are using a rapid strep test. And it says in the actual paperwork inside those kits, follow up every negative with a culture because it misses easily. There have been studies that it'll miss anywhere from 14 to 30% of active strep cases. So if
Mhm.
your doctor is only running a rapid strep and you get that result in 5 minutes and they're coming back to you that quick, that's only step one. They should also be sending everything for a culture. And I've had a number of times, and in my practice, because, I see a lot of kids, we're probably in that 24-25% rate of the rapid strep having missed a true strep infection that showed up on culture 2 to 3 days later. So I
Mhm.
just want to make sure and say that real quick in the beginning so that parents are equipped to say, run both, please. That is
Right.
actually the standard of care, is to
Right.
run both the rapid strep and the strep culture. And then one other thing is that sometimes it is PANDAS from strep, but it was a perianal strep infection and no one's checking the bottom of the kit.
Mhm. Mhm.
So throat negative can be still a PANDAS case if they have strep on their bottom. So, those are just some kind of testy things I want to make sure and clarify for parents so that you're really coming in empowered for that appointment. So strep, we know is part of the story. You mentioned already mycoplasma pneumonia. There's one called chlamydia pneumonia, which is not chlamydia, sexually transmitted infection, but a form of pneumonia. Mycoplasma is really a tricky one because it can take weeks weeks to show the infection, to have symptoms. And then it can take up to 6 to 9 weeks after you're better to stop shedding the mycoplasma. So it's more of a super spreader than COVID ever was and ever will be. I mean, it has really figured things out. It's also figured out how to hide inside of cells, which makes it a little more complicated to treat if we're just using monotherapy with pharmaceuticals. So we've got mycoplasma pneumonia, chlamydia pneumonia. A lot of the families I'm working with, the kids have secondary infections with the whole herpes family. So Epstein-Barr virus, chickenpox, varicella virus. So that whole, because that family, the herpes family, loves nerves, and this is a neurological condition, it just seems like it is one of those infections. And once you get exposed, you never get it completely out of your body. Your immune system just figures out how to put it in jail. And
Hmm.
if you're dealing with a kid who has pre-existing immune deficiency, which is a lot of the cases, that's why an infection tipped over. They do have that immune deficiency where they can't keep all of those things in jail. Also, yeah, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you've seen it also, is this reactivation of Epstein-Barr, particularly after COVID. I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of patients with IgGs going sky high, 3 to 5, 8 times, upper limit because they've been reactivated. So I think that's a really good analogy of talking about putting it in jail because
Yeah.
you can see flares with reactivation like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, COVID is one of them all on its own, but then causing
Hmm.
reactivations of Lyme disease. A lot of PANS kids have a combination of Lyme Borrelia, whether it's tick-borne relapsing fever Borrelia or the classic Lyme Borrelia, with a co-infection of Bartonella.
Hmm.
That I see a lot, and I know you're nodding, and we talk a lot with our other colleagues, and it's like, yep, that's a Bart kid. We also can see things like a lot of times I will see moms who are totally worn out with a Coxsackie infection that they are a chronic carrier of, and they're the ones, passing it on continuously to the kid. So part of also my assessment is always checking parents, not
Hmm.
just for strep, but for Coxsackie, for parvovirus, some of these things where the parents are actually the vector, or what's the word I'm trying to look for, where they're the carriers, and then they're sharing it with the kids, and often it is the one parent who the kid is most attached to but meanest to is the
Hmm.
parent who actually needs care themselves because they are contributing, to the infection load. And then flu, I don't know about you, but like when swine
Yeah.
flu hit, I had so many reactivated kids that
Hmm.
we had, things were flowing, things were going well, and then that darn flu hit. So yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
those are the infection side. Are there any that you noticed that I didn't mention?
Um, well, I guess maybe it would still be in the infection piece, but kids that have been recently vaccinated,
Mm,
I do notice sometimes increases or upticks in flares because we're targeting that immune system again. So I do see recent vaccination of whatever oftentimes will create problems for those kids too.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And then in the environmental, which vaccinations can go in that bucket as well, with the
Yeah.
aluminum and the mercury and PEG, and just things that they're in there to agitate the immune system on purpose, so you mount a response.
Yeah.
So there's no evil lord over. This is just, it's good science if you're only paying attention to that one little silo that you're working on as the scientist, and not realizing, oh,
Yeah.
there are other harms of this that
Right.
could be causing a toxicity issue. I kind of have the top four environmental bad guys for
Hmm.
getting a pandas pans kid to flare or to start the infection or start the condition in the first place in the case of pans.
Hmm.
Number one is weed killer for me. I've had the first case of this where there was no infection. There's a normal kid, and he was like a soccer superstar. They sprayed the fields the morning of a tournament. Their team did very well, so they played all day in this field. And it was within 1 to 2 weeks he developed PANS. And, that's when I was like, okay, this isn't just like a good idea to eat organic and stop spraying our fields. This is actually hurting our kids' brains.
Hmm.
I found research that shows that glyphosate has, a number of problematic problems with that, which is Roundup.
Right.
It's blocking the brain's ability to use glycine. It causes microbiome damage, and Our gut is really our main brain, and then our other brain is just a receiver. So if we're destroying the gut, when they tested glyphosate or Roundup, they said, oh, the mechanism that this works on doesn't affect any human cells because human cells don't have that mechanism. It's called the shikimate pathway. And the amazing Dr. Greg Nye and Stephanie Seneff had brought this forward to say, hey, guess what? Our microbiome has that pathway. So when you're exposed to weed killer, you are actually killing the microbiome of your gut and probably other respiratory passages as well, sinus and lung and that kind of thing. There are no studies about that, but it would make sense. They're bacteria.
Right.
So
Right.
poor little kid, had a whole soccer day, got exposed to this, and his microbiome got the effect. And I'm not sure what they sprayed. We never could get a test,
Hmm.
but it's possible it was glyphosate. It's also very possible that it was atrazine.
Mm.
And atrazine, if you look at the map of the usage of atrazine, almost our entire country is just sopped in it. There's so much atrazine being used. What they find with atrazine is that a low grade daily exposure, so not the big exposure, the low grade daily exposure attacks the dopamine receptors in the brain,
Mm.
which is exactly the mechanism that is being, tested for pandas and pans.
Right.
Basal ganglia encephalitis involves dopamine receptor damage in the basal ganglia. And if you smell atrazine day after day, you get that same damage. So
Mm.
does it have to be an infection? No. The exact damage that we're seeing can happen from atrazine exposure.
Well, and I think there's another point to be made here about the fact that, a lot of the research has been done on glyphosate, for example, but there are many other pesticides and herbicides that are being that glyphosate is being replaced with. And these things are potentially even more harmful than
Right.
glyphosate. It's just that we have the research on the glyphosate now, and we don't have the research or as much research on some of these other products. But just because, it doesn't have glyphosate in it or atrazine, as you mentioned, doesn't mean that it's safe. It just means that we just don't know.
Right.
Um,
There
so
hasn't been a lawsuit about.
yeah, exactly.
And what's wild with atrazine is if it is a big exposure, that can actually in frogs, it can make a male frog become female. And if it's a big enough exposure, not only female, but be able to procreate.
Mm.
So it's also causing, endocrine changes in children as well. So, I mean, we have a lot of research. It's just there hasn't been a lawsuit on atrazine yet. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
hopefully if anyone's listening and has the connections, we can get that stuff out. And we can do this
Yeah.
better. Like there's so much research on regenerative farming. We absolutely could be doing better, and we need to be for our kids' health. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So what are some of those other environmental triggers then?
Yeah, so a lot of people are surprised that mold is number 2 on my list, but number 2 is mold, number 3 is mercury, and is EMFs, and then number 4 is mercury.
Hmm.
And the reason for those 4 is that they can create all of the same symptoms and damage in the kids that we see in the studies of kids who have PANDAS pans. So when we do a brain biopsy, or if we do a mouse study or something like that and induce it, these 4 things can all do the same. So mold is a big part of it, but I think that it is not as globally exposed in our country. You have to be in an exposure to have that happen to you. And granted, there are way more moldy homes than I ever imagined. But there's a lot more glyphosate and atrazine than there is mold exposure. So that's why I put that first. And then mold, it's the mold and the mycotoxins. The mycotoxins can get into the brain and they can induce the mast cell damage and the immune damage that we see, same as PANDAS pans.
Yeah, so I've heard you about mold and mycotoxins before. Can you, just for our listeners, give the differentiation between a mold exposure and a mycotoxin?
Sure. So a mold will off gas certain chemicals as part of its metabolism. So it will off-gas things like alcohol and microbial VOCs. And then if it is in a competitive environment, so it's got the humidity that it wants. I always call it lakefront property. It's like sitting there just looking at this humid air and is like, la, I can grow. All I need is a little dust. Thank you. So if it's sitting there and another type of mold spore comes in thinking the same thing, they will make these little bioweapons called mycotoxins to compete with the other mold. So we're not the target, but it affects our bodies in exactly the same way. And these mycotoxins, they're not alive. They're a chemical that's secreted by living mold. So some people are like, how do I kill mycotoxins? And I was like, okay, we kill the mold because the mold is, Brian Carr says this is a great analogy. Mold is the factory and the mycotoxins are the smoke from that factory.
Mm.
So we need to detoxify the smoke, the mycotoxins, and stop the production of the factory. So we have to,
Mhm.
disassemble the factory and clean out the smoke, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so then the other two triggers you said were EMF and mercury. So let's talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, EMFs, this is something I differentiate in my book, the difference between an internally generated EMF and an externally generated one. Although if you have a mold mycotoxin exposure, you can become sensitive to both. And that's where people have like exercise intolerance. Kids will seem lazy.
Mhm.
They won't be able to do what you're asking them to do. And you're like, come on, how hard is it to get up and go brush your teeth? But if they have mitochondrial damage, and they're sensitive to EMFs, movement and exercise generates these internal EMFs, and they're very good for us. Like people become very, very afraid of EMFs, and I understand that. That's the external ones. But if you can move your body and generate the internal ones, it is a wonderful way to ground your body, especially if you can do it outdoors, to make you less sensitive to the external ones. But what we see is that there's a calcium channel, which is getting more medical change that it can do in the nerves. And so it creates what's called channelopathies. So the nerves don't conduct the way they're supposed to, and they can get in a loop. So you can see that limbic looping with EMF exposure.
Mhm.
And there are things we can do. The idea is just mitigate wherever you can in easy ways. And the biggest one is just your sleeping environment, because that's where we do the most of our healing. So we try to just make sure that sleeping environments are well protected, whether that's a Faraday cage, you can make it a princess thing, have some fun with it. It doesn't have to be like, get in your cage now.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just had the founder of Haven, which is an EMF blocking company, on the show. So, anyway, if you're looking for something, I think I'll put it in the show notes, but they did set up a code for us for a discount. So, check out some of those some of those
Yeah.
products if you're looking to really protect yourself from EMF in addition to trying to do everything you can in your own home.
Yeah. And there are simple things you can do, which is just literally getting contact with your skin outdoor in nature with the intention of discharging frenetic energy. So, you can just go in, you can touch the trees, you can, if it's winter, a lot of times I just have kids like lay their forehead right on a tree or,
Mm.
a cheek on a rock or something like that, so that there's still contact and there's a way to just, with that intention of, okay, I'm going to go defrag my system right now. And that a couple of times a day of doing that can make a huge difference
Mhm.
in what the body can take on. And nature's happy to accept that. It just gobbles it up like food. It just is like, num, num, num. The earth can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always tell people, they ask me some of my secrets. One of my secrets is that I have chickens and I have to open the coop every single morning. So I have to go outside in the sunshine. I put my feet in the grass, all of these things first thing in the morning. Um, and it forces me to do that. It forces me to continue that habit, even if it's, disgusting. Like we've had floods here, we've had snow, we've had all kinds of stuff. But ultimately, I think creating those kinds of habits is really, really important in getting you to a much healthier place, because when you create the habit, it's much, much easier to, do all of those things every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some people, their human design is that they're a responder.
Mm,
They're not going to generate that of like, this is good for me, I'm going to go do it.
yeah.
Some people can do that, but some are responders, which means if you are somebody who responds to that need, which it sounds like you are, create that, create
Mhm,
something, whether it's to go refill your bird bath or, whatever it is that you go do every day, get some bird feeders and you have to go fill them every morning or whatever it is. If you're a responder, put yourself into a situation where you need to respond to something that needs you outside.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. Great.
100%. Yeah.
So, yeah. I
All
always
right.
love those little hacks of like,
Y-
how can I figure myself out a little bit? First of all, forgive myself for being wired how I am, and then, understand it, forgive it, and then take action, around that.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think, so often, when you're treating a lot of patients, you get into this mode of, you know, um, trying to systematize and look at things from a clinical perspective, but a lot of times it's so much more simple than that. And I think we need to sometimes take a step back and realize that there are so many other things that we can be tidbits that we can offer our patients that can really make a huge difference, a huge impact, and they're not very difficult to implement.
Right. They're against society. They're not getting reinforced by anything because you're not making anyone any money.
Yeah.
But, they are, we live lives that are so far away from natural and,
Hmm.
that what our systems need. So on that note, on the mercury side,
Yeah.
a lot of kids are still getting mercury fillings.
Hmm.
And there is tons of research of how that crosses the blood-brain barrier and then the effects that it has on the nervous system of the brain. This is just something we absolutely need to get out of the practice of dentistry. We have to absolutely stop putting this so close to kids' brains. This is not something that we should be doing anymore. And I'm hoping by spreading the word, we just kind of, you know, pressure dentists to be like, okay, drop that whole mercury thing,
Hmm.
just can't be
Hmm.
doing that to kids anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned that your boys were got Lyme via congenital Lyme. So, it's something that I have discussed quite a bit. In various talks and things that I've given, but maybe not so much on the podcast, particularly Lyme disease. I haven't really done a whole lot on Lyme, even though my son and myself were diagnosed with Lyme. And that was a major piece of the puzzle for us when figuring out PANS for him. And obviously, getting myself back to a state of health because, I had passed it on to him. Very early on. So tell us a little bit about what kinds of things can a mother pass on to her child that predisposes their child to things like PANS and PANDAS, or even just, chronic infections, even if it doesn't manifest symptom wise as PANS or PANDAS.
Mm. Some of this we don't really have a lot of human studies on because we
Yeah.
can't do a control group where we say, we're going to infect you with this and then we're going to not infect you with this other, and then see if the babies get it. But we do have animal studies that show that. And there was a study in dogs with Lyme disease, with Borrelia that causes Lyme, not the
Mhm.
Borrelia that causes tick-borne relapsing fever, even though both look very, very, very similar. They gave the mom Lyme during pregnancy. So she started as a healthy dog. They gave her Lyme. Most, but not all the pups developed Lyme disease after they were born. So, or were born with Lyme. So when they, tested umbilical cord, they tested placenta, they tested pups, and most, but not all of them did have it. So it's not a guarantee if a mom has Lyme that it's going to get passed on. I think there's some strain differences. So if you have a really virulent strain, which we would say, like more of a bully, then, and it's figured out how to survive better in bodies, I think that's going to be pretty strain dependent, and also just the general nutritional status of mom.
Mhm.
And did she have Lyme before pregnancy, or did she get Lyme, acute Lyme during pregnancy? I think some of those kind of things lead to, more of a tendency to passing it on. There's some research that Babesia and Bartonella can get vertically passed, so through pregnancy. And then I don't really know all of the viruses off the top of my head, but
Mhm.
I do go looking for that. And during, if we're kind of going back to say, how did you feel during your pregnancy? What were your symptoms? And
Mhm.
if fatigue was the big, big, big thing, I go looking for the herpes family, so
Yeah.
Epstein-Barr, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had mono at 18 years old, and during my pregnancy, what that was my whole thing was I felt fine, but I would literally sit at the table at night and like fall asleep in my plate because I was so exhausted. But everything looked good. I was in really good shape when I got pregnant. So all of these things looked fine. But I, I don't know that I was fine
No,
necessarily.
yeah, it shouldn't be like a pregnancy is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do that on a body, but you shouldn't be falling asleep instead of eating dinner,
Right,
that's too far gone. Yeah.
right,
And that's
right.
really common, and it gets missed back on the testing, gets missed a lot because we don't test Epstein-Barr with the full panel,
Hmm.
that and the in a quantitative way. So we don't look at, oh, these titers, meaning how many antibodies you had that against this thing. If they're on the higher end, if they're 2 to 3 fold what they should be, so 2 to 3 times above the top range, that's more likely a reactivation.
Yeah.
And then if you have a high, what's called an early antigen, just for anyone listening, I don't know if you've covered this already, but the Epstein-Barr early antigen, I run that every single time. Not
Hmm.
only when somebody is, the conventional model only runs it if you have an active mono infection.
Yeah.
But there's lots of walking woundeds out there that are, just putting up with, and like you said, and then COVID just flared all of that.
Hmm.
And mold, the mycotoxins, they impact the B cells, which is our memory cells.
Hmm.
So, for those that are listening, we have these, once you've seen an infection, we make these, I kind of think of it as like a little library book about how to fight that infection and keep it in jail. So if we see
Hmm.
it again, we can fight it right away. And if it's one of those that we don't eradicate all the way, you just put those guys in jail. And that just means more of them that your body is trying to contain. Well, the memory cells, that library book that says, here's what it looks like, here are the symptoms, here's how we killed it, here's how we, all those things. Mycotoxins completely wipe out your memory cells. So even if you have already fought something off, the next time you get exposed to that, it can become an acute infection again.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And I think my tendency to think about how COVID is working is that it's doing the same thing. It's affecting memory B cells.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm one of those who got COVID at least 5 times. So I think I think you're onto something there because despite doing all the things, I made sure that all of my vitamin D levels were high, that I was taking in adequate, B vitamins and zinc and all of the things. But continuously kept getting actively sick with COVID. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and
interesting.
it was in its rapid evolution as well. So,
Hmm.
you had to also deal with how much smarter it got in a short run because it had
Yeah.
been, trained to be better at what it did.
Mm, absolutely. Wink,
Talking
wink.
in code.
Right.
Yeah, somebody had trained it to do that.
Strange.
Mhm.
Um, okay. So, I want to kind of dispel some of these myths. So much of the conversation with Pans and Pandas centers around triggers and flares and all of those kinds of things. And back when my son was diagnosed, and I'm sure with your kids as well, um, there was very little conventional information, and what there was simply antibiotics and IVIG and potentially, various psychiatric medications to manage behaviors. So I would love to hear kind of the newer, more expanded knowledge that we have in this world and give a few tips for parents that maybe go into a practitioner who, you know, has heard of Pans or Pandas and tries to push them down this one very narrow road.
Hmm. Yeah, the conventional approach is basically anti-inflammatories, antibiotics, immune modulation with IVIG, maybe plasmapheresis,
Hmm.
and psychiatric medication and cognitive
Hmm.
behavioral therapy. Full stop.
Right.
It's
Right.
kind of like, okay, that's what we have. Integratively, we have a massive toolbox. And we are paying attention to things like the gut microbiome brain connection. That is a huge part of this. If
Hmm.
there is tummy trouble, there's going to be brain trouble. And so we're paying attention to that. So modulating the immune system through the gut microbiome is a very big part of the integrative approach. We also have a lot more research, thanks to researchers like Dr. Thea Harides, about mast cells
Yeah.
and how they're playing in this story. And that's not paid attention to at all. I remember our first time we were in the IVIG suite, and another parent had said, I'm just trying to share it with all the parents that when we add Benadryl to our, and this is like way, way, way back, 2010,
Yeah.
12, somewhere there. When we had Benadryl to our plan, the IVIG sticks longer.
Mm.
And I was like, well, shoot, we're doing it, because I'm not going to,
Sure.
this is very expensive. It was out of pocket. I was like, I will add a little Benadryl if that's going to take, help them stretch it out longer.
Right.
Now that we know more about mast cells, it's like, well, no wonder.
Hmm.
Because when the immune system, that immune depletion part, that's another thing that integratively we're paying attention to. And I did share that with the Stanford PANS Clinic again early on. I was like, are you guys assessing for CVIDs, which is combined variable immunodeficiency syndrome? And she said at the time, we're not. And I said, you might want to look into that, because I'm finding that the kids who have that need more rounds of IVIG because they just have this base, their immune system's just wiped out.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when the organized antibody British Army version of our immune system gets wiped out? The mast cells come in.
Hmm.
They do hand-to-hand combat, and they, you know, they come in like a cluster bomb. They're non-discriminate. They will harm self tissue if there is something in the way. If there's a virus there, it'll
Mm.
come in and harm self tissue to get the job done.
Yeah.
Whereas the antibodies are very much more organized. I always call them the British Army versus the Rambos.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and if you don't have enough of the organized one that goes and tags and says, this is the specific building that you need to go to, and this is the specific room, and this specific bug, and you don't get a lot of self tissue that gets harmed, if those are wiped out or even running on low power mode, then when the mast cells come in, it's just blow up. So
Hmm.
now paying attention to that, what we can do, and we know how that the fact that mast cells are involved in this condition, we can manage the flame from that direction. And then kids aren't so flareable. And if they do get triggered, it's not as severe. So
Hmm.
I kind of have a core four for treatment. That's what I call it. Number one is tame the flame. Number two is beat the bugs. Three is regulate the immunity. And four is guard the gates. So we're getting
Mm.
rid of infection and exposures. Number one being tame the flame, because if we can calm that flame down and get the mast cells not so triggered, then we can take care of the infection if it's there. And then we can regulate the immunity and boost up that immunity. So then the mast cells don't feel like they're the only ones to do the job,
Hmm.
and then stop exposures. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like the order that I think when I'm approaching this.
I think that's brilliant because, all too often I think the approach has been going after the kill protocols first. And in my opinion, from what I've seen, is that that only serves to fuel the fire, right? Because now
Yeah.
all of a sudden we're trying to kill off something in addition. And then, if we're using antibiotics, for example, we're also killing the gut microbiome at the same time. So we're, making that even worse. So I absolutely agree with you. I think ultimately we really have to take a look at, where's the brain on fire and how do we put that out? And just personally, from an anecdotal standpoint, one of the biggest pieces for us was adding in antihistamine herbs because as soon as we did that, it started calming the mast cells. And then all of a sudden, those, the highly agitated, angry, aggressive kind of behaviors stopped. They were done. So those kinds of things I think are hugely important.
Yeah. And it isn't all mast cells. So if that's
Yeah.
in that whole tame the flame category, I have things that reduce brain inflammation general.
Yeah.
That's going to be what the strep induces, this
Hmm.
general inflammation. And then the second category is things that calm the mast cells. And a
Hmm.
lot of parents are like, but my kids aren't allergic to anything. Why are we doing mast cell support? And that's because we don't understand that mast cells secrete more than histamine.
Hmm.
So an
Hmm.
antihistamine can help, but
Yeah.
a mast cell stabilizer, that's what the herbs do so well.
Yeah.
Mast cells can dump over 1,000 different inflammatory chemicals. So if we're only taking care of the histamine, antihistamine, we're missing all these other chemicals. And we've learned more about that with COVID. A lot of parents now are using the word cytokine like it's part of our vocabulary.
Right.
The
Right.
gift from COVID is we understood, oh, inflammation is a very complex thing.
Hmm.
So I love the herbs because they stabilize those mast cells. And then that stabilizes them from not only dumping histamine, but dumping all these other inflammatory molecules.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I find the leukotrienes really are the thing that get that anger aggression. Did you find Perilla was helpful? Was that one of them that you used?
Um, it was Bob Miller who gave us all of our so the MC stabilizer and the Hista-Ease. I think those were the two main ones that initially really, really helped. But um, yeah, so there's a whole concoction in there. I'll link that in the show notes for anybody who's interested in learning more about those particular supplements. But okay, so tell us a little bit about once we kind of tame the flame, then what would be the next approach and what kinds of things in your toolkit are you utilizing at that point?
Then we go into beating the bugs, but I do
Mhm.
like to do that with herbs again because they have antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory. So
Mhm.
we're stacking on top of that anti-inflammatory tame the flame step by using the herbs that are antimicrobial. I also like them because most of them have multiple types of critters that they will kill off. So they're not just a single directed. And my approach is to start with the plants if tolerated. If a kid has salicylate sensitivity for mold, that's a little trickier. But in general, put the herbs down first and see how we do, then slowly increase that to get to a therapeutic dose.
Yeah.
Then if we need it, we might add in an antibiotic or, an anti-malarial for Babesia or something like that. But I don't take away the plants to do that. I add because we
Hmm.
find that the plants reduce drug resistance of these microbes. They have ways to kind of keep the bugs susceptible to the treatment. And they also have antibiofilm activity. So that's a huge, huge part. And
Yeah.
many of them do something that's called potentiation, which I know you know what that is, but I'll share with the people listening. That means it's going to help the drug actually work better.
Hmm.
So it's going to get you farther for what you're putting into it. So I kind of have these category of plants that I call the botanical avatars for pandas and pans. It's just like my weird brain is always thinking in cartoons. But I just think like an avatar, when I really sat down, I was like, what are all the mechanisms going on? There's microbiome changes, there's attack of these receptors in the brain that
Yeah.
run our brain chemistry. So we need something that's going to calm that brain chemistry part down and boost the kind of brain chemistry we want, which is serotonin and GABA, and that having an effect on the inflammation, having an effect on the mast cells, having an effect on the kidneys, because a lot of kids have urinary symptoms, calming gut pain. I was like, oh, it would be so cool if there was one plant that could do all of those. And I just stopped to think about what am I, the things that I'm seeing work.
Hmm.
What are they addressing all of those mechanisms? So Scutellaria bicalensis, which is Chinese skullcap,
Hmm.
any of the berberine containing plants like
Yep.
Oregon grapefruit. So there's this whole list of botanical avatars. When I dug into all the research, I found out why it was working. I went the other way, because it was kind of like in the beginning, we didn't know what the mechanisms were. So I was just
Yeah.
trying everything. And I also found there are a bunch of plants that I thought would be good that ended up putting my kids into manic states. So,
Mm-hmm.
quote, good for the brain, that doesn't translate once it goes to an autoimmune condition like
Yeah.
PANDAS. So things like lemon balm, passion flower, turmeric is actually making the brain chemistry changes worse. So
Mm-hmm.
I just take those out of my toolbox when I'm working with
Mm-hmm.
these kids. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggie. So the botanical avatars, I see them as like laying the foundation so that there's a stable foundation, and then we can put the other things on top of that, and it works so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then I really want to touch on the modulating the immune system because I feel like in conventional medicine, this is often the piece that is really missed. We go in, we try to kill, any and all pathogens, and we forget that, like, oh, we got to go back in and remodulate the immune system so we avoid future flaring. So tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that you might use for that.
One of my favorite is colostrum.
Mm,
It's it will give you the IgGs that a lot of these kids are lacking in.
yeah.
But one other thing that that's doing that I don't get seen talked about with gut health as much as we should is the mucus layer that lines our intestinal wall. If you don't have a nice thick gel layer around your intestines, there's nowhere for those probiotics to stick.
Hmm.
And there are certain things that can help that, and colostrum is one of those. So colostrum is doing many, many things at one time by boosting the immune system, giving back those immunoglobulins, and then creating that nice layer that's coating the inside of our intestines. So then all the rest of the stuff you do, there's somewhere for that to land and lock. So probiotics are also part of that. I do love peptides for these
Hmm.
kids. I see them do amazing. BPC 157 is
Yep.
it's just an auto, you know. And then what that means is body protection compound for those listening. This is something that's made in the intestines that helps with the body healing all through the body. So
Hmm.
it's a gut derived protective compound that then the body can assign it to wherever that kid is struggling, whether they're, spraining ankles a lot because their Lyme is flaring or whatever.
Yeah.
All of those things can get better. So when people say, well, what is it good for? I'm like, whatever ails you, kind of.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah, I took mine this morning and I swear I have a lot of issues, chronic illness, liked to reside in my left hip for whatever reason. And so every time I take it, I notice a massive difference in my pain levels. So,
yeah, yep. And
yeah,
of course, IVIG is part of that, modulating the immune system, but it's not the only tool.
yeah.
And that's where if we have done all those other things, if we're working the plan and we've and even exosomes, those are wonderful if you can
Hmm.
get a hold of them. Those are little messengers from your immune cells. So you don't even need the immune cells themselves. So if a kid does have, that bone marrow that just isn't making the immunoglobulins, I've found a genetic component that where some people don't make they have genetic SNPs, so they have a harder time making IgG. And so if
Hmm.
that is their situation, I'm like, you need peptides. We'll put them on TB4 frag. We'll put them on things that are, helping the immune system, but also then they're a kid who's going to respond better from exosomes as well.
Mm.
Um, and then, IVIG is part of it. I'm curious about your experience. I have never seen a one and done IVIG work. Okay.
Yeah, no, and I would say I see it beneficial in maybe about 50%, maybe slightly higher, but I do have questions about the blood product these days. So
Yep. Yeah.
that could be contributing. But yeah, I will say the thing about IVIG is if it works, it's great. And if it doesn't, there are thankfully a lot of other avenues we can
Yes.
try. Um,
Yes. Totally.
but I've also seen IVIG be unfortunately detrimental to some kids too. So um, yeah, so I'm a little bit more cautious when it comes to recommendations, when it comes to IVIG. But I fully understand and appreciate that for some kids, that's the absolute way to go. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And where I see it detrimental is if somebody isn't understanding what the purpose is,
mm,
because that dose matters. And I have a big
yeah.
type in my book, by the way. Um, so embarrassing that, you know, and he goes through all these readers and none of us caught it, but the dose is 1.5 grams per kilogram. In
Mm,
my book, if you got the first run of it, it says milligrams per kilogram. That's way, 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 way not enough. But
mm,
a lot of people will do under 1 gram per kilogram. That's the that's the supportive dose. So
yeah.
that's for somebody who literally does have the it's called hypogammaglobulinemia.
Mhm.
Now you can have hypogammaglobulinemia and have PANS. The whole goal with IVIG with PANDAS and PANS is to give you a suppressive dose to go so over the top
Yeah.
that the bone marrow just says, well, I'm going on vacation. Awesome. And what that functions on is that those memory cells then forget that they were upset about the brain tissue and
Mm,
they go look for other critters. So where I've seen it really flare a kid is when we do under 1 gram per
mm.
kilogram, because then we've just fueled the fight against their own brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, I could, talk about this for all day long. But we've reached the end of our show where I ask every single one of our guests 8 rapid fire questions. These questions are designed to give us a little bit of insight into who you are and what makes you tick. So, Dr. Jill Crista, number one, if you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Sunshine.
I love that. All right, number two, tell us something most people don't know about you.
I am a dancer. A lot of people don't know. So African dance, belly dance, anything. Give me a dance floor and I'm a happy girl. Or
Well,
music.
we should get
I don't even need
together.
a dance floor. I just go to the living room.
I teach line dancing in my
Oh,
off time.
oh my mercy.
Yeah. All right, number three, this will go well with with what we just talked about. If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
I have that playlist. And the very first song on mine is Lovely Day. I love
Nice.
that song. Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely Day.
Awesome. All right, number four. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Diet Coke.
Ooh,
I
interesting.
know. Plot thickens.
All
Everyone who
right.
works with me at my clinic, they're like, that is so incongruent. And I was like, I my drug. Can't help it.
All right, number five. What is the most influential book you've ever read?
The Holographic Universe.
Hmm.
I love that book. It's very dense, but it set the stage for me to go do all of the shamanic training that I've done, shamanic and energy work. As I read it, I was like, yep, I totally now how do I get trained to think this way? It's a very
Yeah.
sciencey book, but it
Yeah.
popped open my limited thinking.
Interesting. All
What's
right.
yours? I'm curious. What's your most influential?
Oh gosh. There's a lot, but Journey of the Pink Dolphins is a book that I read years ago about the Amazon and the pink dolphins in the Amazon. And it was just I don't know, almost it's just a very healing book to me. It's very hard to find now, but it's kind of obscure. But anyway,
Nice.
that's the
I
first
see
one
it.
that comes to
See
mind.
a Peru trip in your future to go
Yeah.
swim.
Very cool. All right. What does the word revolution mean to you?
I like that the core of the word is evolution.
Mhm.
So that's when I think about it, I don't think about, like stakes and, whatever, protests or whatever. I think it is a way for us to evolve
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
break down things that aren't working.
And what does the word remedy mean to you?
Assistance.
Mm.
Yeah.
And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
Get outside. It's just as easy as that. Get outside.
I
As
love
much
it.
as possible, wherever possible, whenever possible. Touch base. We need to remember we are nature.
Touch grass, like the kids say. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Dr. Jill Crista, where can people find you? I know you're hosting a new monthly masterclass for parents that are looking to learn more. So tell us a little bit about where they can find information about that.
Yep, that's at drkrista.com. That's spelled drcrista.com. Yep. We'll
Perfect. Well,
have a Pandas Pans focused one on for October for Pandas Pans Awareness Month.
that's awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Jill Crista, for being here and sharing an hour with us today. We appreciate your wisdom. We will see you all next time. Take care.
With hope as a guiding light, through darkest days we'll fight the night. With a whole lot of passion, with a whole lot of truth, Remedy Revolution is here for you.